Here's just a quick overview of different types of illustrators and how they illustrate children's books. Here's some children's books that are in my house. But you can see this one's got a real soft watercolor background. They faded some of that away. Now they use probably what's called a wash. You put water down and you add small amounts of color to that water and it disperses and has real soft. But you can see how he did the rabbit here, the hair. Laid some colors down, lights. You can see some of the variation of the watercolors, and then went around it with a fine little pen. Okay, so that's one technique. Here's another technique. Another one, watercolors with a little pen. But if you look up close here, you can see there's little crosshatch, little lines creating some values on top of there. And then also some other things. I bet you these might have been drawn in with like little tiny markers or something, some of these things, or they could have been painted in. So it's a combination of watercolors, pen, little crosshatch producing halftones, and then even maybe some additional little drawing on top of that. Here's another watercolor one. I love the background here. You can tell this is a wash where they put water down, then they had yellows and pinks ready to go and added that to the water and did the background first. Look how they did the ice here and all these streaks of watercolors. And then they went back in with a pen and did these really fine outlines and small details in here. Okay. Here's one that they did, looks like watercolors. But then what they did is, you notice the main characters have outlines, and then some of the background things they just left a little bit more unfinished and faded, which puts them further in the back. Okay. Like look at the bookcase here. All the books are just sort of vague images of books, whereas the cat and the boy and the chair and the books have outlines and they're a little more defined. Here's one that I think looks like watercolors, and then they probably put a base down, and you can tell by here, it looks as though they may have used colored pencil to put all that texture in, because you can tell by the texture on his face as well. And then some of this texture in here. So probably doing a drawing, laying watercolors down, and then building a lot of colored pencil over the top of that. Okay. Oop, that one missing something. Here's Arthur. You've seen him. Now look at the backgrounds in these. This looks like watercolor, but if you look close, it looks almost like crayon. I'm thinking colored pencil. So they added a texture over the top of probably these plain yellow walls to make kind of a pattern. And the same thing with the floor here. And then painted Arthur and then went around him with a pen just outlining him. There's not really any crosshatch on there. Here's a book that this looks as though it was done in pencil and charcoal. And you can tell by the texture of the paper here. You can see the texture. So this was probably all done in charcoal, and then other parts they probably use a little bit of watercolor and then a pen. Okay? Now here's an illustrator that used pastel, and you can tell by the technique here of the softer edges, you can see how you just brush on just a little bit of pastel. So these are small. These probably the originals were really large and then they were made small to put into this book. So that would be pastels. This is an example of computer illustration. And the reason you can tell is it's got these super sharp edges. It's got these beautiful gradients that go from yellow to orange. And then it's got these perfectly edges and round parts to it, like these little parts on the eyebrows here. So I'm assuming this was done on the computer. You can also tell by the smooth gradient in the background that goes from dark blue to light blue. So I'm sure originally it was a drawing. It was scanned into the computer, and then they worked on the computer adding all these colors and gradients and things, okay? Here's another one that was done on the computer, and this has got a totally different look to it with sharp outlines and then filled in flat colors in some of those areas. Now I'm going to divide this into sections and just going to show you 4 different illustration techniques. So I'm just going to take a light pencil line and go like this. Guess I can't even see that. And then I'm going to do it this way too, but I'll do it really light. And this is obviously just to show you some different methods of finishing off your illustration. So here's my finished illustration that has an example of 4 different techniques on it. The first technique here, I used a Sharpie, a pen, and a fine line pen to outline things, give them detail. Second example, I went over the top of the watercolors with colored pencil. And if you notice, I have a lot of different colors overlapping, usually really bright. This one I used black and white charcoal. Obviously, it's more of a black and white look. But what's nice, rather than just black and white, you still have this color that's showing through. And the last one, I used a watercolor brush, really broad strokes. So if you want really thick lines that go from thin to thick, your watercolor brush is going to do a much better job than your Sharpie would, okay? So those are 4 techniques, and obviously you can mix those up. You can include colored pencil and pen. You can include small pen marks in here with this. So you can mix and match. I mean, you can do whatever you want as far as techniques. The point is to experiment. And then there still is just plain watercolors. So like this one here, the Jellyfish, my daughter did this a few years back. And it just, with these really long, thin tentacles, she wanted them in color, and outlining them in black just wouldn't be the same thing. So she did this one, all watercolors at all, very delicately done, no pen or anything. Okay, so you got quite a few techniques. What I would do is in your sketchbook, before you actually start on the good paper, is I would take your sketchbook sheet and put some watercolors on here and just experiment. Try some different methods, okay? Try using a pen, try using colored pencil until you kind of come up with something that you really like. Okay, that's it.